Okay. Let's look at the small blind versus the button. So folds to the button, button raises, and we have a call frequency. It's a very low call frequency, but I get the idea that as we get deeper, so if we put in 200 big blinds, as we get deeper, the call frequency goes up significantly, right? So learning how to play out of position from the small blind is a very important skill, because eventually if you are playing deep stack poker, you should have a calling range from the small blind. So practicing at 100 big blinds is good for, again, when you become more deep stacked in the game. So we're going to look at the 100 big blinds. I mean, technically, you could just continue to 3-bet only at 100 big blinds and then switch to calling at 200 big blinds. But I like a challenge. It's fun. And I think I can learn a lot from doing this. So especially if recreational players or other pros are calling out of the small blind, then I'll be ready to play against that, which is a very underrated topic that no one really discusses about. When they're simplifying, they kind of forget, oh yeah, well, what happens if someone else is playing that strategy? Well, then, you know, you're going to have to guess the whole time. All right. Why is this raise 10? Should be raise. I must have not clicked the right one. Yeah, that's why. General 100, 500. GTO. There we go. So here we go. Button versus small blind. You can see here, the small blind range is very capped, right? Right away, we can notice there's no jacks, there's no queens, there's no kings, there's no aces, there's no ace king, there's no ace king suited, there's no ace queen suited, right? This is all pure 3-bets. And so we're left with a lot of medium strength Broadway combos and some mid pairs like pocket 7s, pocket 8s, pocket 9s. And it's interesting because it's a very condensed range. So on a lot of textures, we're going to have a lot of equity, but then on other textures, we might not have nearly any equity. So something that might be counterintuitive is that on some low textures, I think the button is going to have an advantage over the small blind. Even though the small blind has all of these low pocket pairs at a mixed frequency, when they call, they don't have any of these combos over here, which the button will have a mixture of those, right? A button is going to have everything in this little section here. And so on board textures like 985 or something like that, I think the button is going to have a significant advantage. I guess we could test this theory real quick. Let me make it rainbow. Maybe I am incorrect because it looks like there's a high leading frequency from the small blind. So that indicates that the small blind, in fact, is going to still have an advantage here. Yes, and it looks like that is the case. That actually leads me to my next point, which I totally forgot, is that the small blind is actually going to have an advantage on a lot of board textures because it's a condensed range. The continuing range is a lot more narrow than when the button is raising. So the button is raising nearly 50% of hands, whereas the small blind is only continuing with a very narrow range for calling, right? If we look at this, 1.6% of range here, it looks like. Very narrow. And it is very condensed, and it's going to do well against the button. So looking at the small blind's actions in the aggregated reports, you can see that there's a fairly decent frequency of, I got to work on my language. There's a is this small? I would say this is a large frequency for leading in general. So I'm going to say it's large, right? Even though it's only 22% of the time, I still think that this is a large range for leading. So the small blind has a large range for leading, and we can see on what board textures it's going to lead the most. And it looks like the 7 high boards, the 8 high boards, exactly the opposite of what I was basically just saying before. So these board textures, I assume, are going to come under the advantage of the small blind because of those middle pairs. I underestimated how much equity this little section here would bring. But it looks like it does attribute a lot of the value on those boards to these middling pairs, because the 7-6, the 6-5, the 5-4, the 8-7, it's not really a high frequency. But looking at it, all of the like full orange squares, or the mostly filled up orange squares, are going to represent the most common combos that we have. And so on a board, you know, like 7XX, we have a lot of 7-7, 8-8, 9-9. We even have some of like Jack 9 suited, 10-8 suited, which have some gut shots and stuff like that. So I can see why this is the case. As a reminder, by the way, this studying is meant for me as well as you guys. So I'm learning with you. I'm not preaching to you guys. I know it kind of sounds like it sometimes, but it's definitely a learning process for me as well. I'm trying to get better. That's why I study in the morning. And the added benefit is that when I'm learning, sometimes you can learn from me learning, right? Just wanted to make that clear. I actually meant to say the button has the range advantage because of the overpairs. Yes. But maybe that's not big enough part of the range to tip into the advantages side of things. No. Yeah. Most of the time, the button is going to have a range advantage because of the stronger hands. That big blind is not 3-betting. Okay, so now that I've erased the first part of what I said and fixed it with the fact that the small blind is going to have a high frequency of leading, going to have a condensed range that does well against the button, we're going to look for different spots to lead and what that looks like. So small blind versus big blind. Here, what I'll do is I'll do this and then come up. So small blind versus button. Typically, I was looking at the button side of it. However, should I look at the button c-betting side against it first? It kind of makes sense to me to look at the stronger range first, right? And I think in this case, the small blind call range might be stronger. As we can see in the ranges, for the reports, the equity advantage goes to out of position, as well as the EV advantage, I think. No, in position still has the EV advantage. Okay. But the equity advantage does in fact go to out of position. It's a very unique scenario. It's not very often you see the equity advantage given to out of position. Although playing out of the small blind, you have to be very selective. So it makes sense that the range would be very strong against a lot of different ranges. Comparatively, if we had an under the gun raise and a small blind call, would we still have that equity advantage? It looks like no. Now the equity advantage is in favor of under the gun. So there is a point to where it shifts. Where is that point? Is it the button, or is the cutoff still going to have a disadvantage? Let's see. Okay. Yeah, so out of position equity. Oh, did I look at a specific board with the under the gun instead of the reports by accident? I think I might have. Out of position, Small blind still has an advantage here against the cutoff. Let's try and look at under the gun again. I may have made a mistake there. There we go. Equity out of position. So no, yeah, I was right. So against the cutoff, there's still an advantage. What about the hijack? Now it's about even, but slightly in the advantage of the hijack. So against late position, small blind has an advantage in equity. And then I think the leading range is going to jump in theory then from playing against the hijack versus playing versus the cutoff. So leading 13% of the time here. And then leading 16% of the time versus the cutoff. And then versus the button, we saw it was like 22% or something. Yeah, 23% about. So small blind versus button. Small blind has, would you say significant equity advantage? I would say close. 53 versus 46. That's 54 versus 46. That's pretty high. Small blind has, we'll just say small blind has equity advantage. Has relatively high leading frequency. All right. Thank God for autocorrect. Am I right? Online doesn't have any bad garbage, right? Yeah, I'm kind of understanding that again. I knew that, and then it's been so long since I've looked at this scenario that I just like totally whiffed that thought. I was trying to like be fancy with some concepts that didn't really work in this scenario, right? Because I forgot that the small blind actually has an equity advantage over the button because the button has such a wide range versus the small blind continuing range when they call. So yeah, I botched that one, but that's fine. I learned. I relearned technically. Okay, stop correcting me, please. Thank you. Moving on. So we see that there's a leading range that's significant. We'll look at what that range looks like. So versus the button, the small blind leads on board textures seemingly that have 7 high. Pocket aces with a 7. So the 7 is like a key card, perhaps. I see a lot of the 7 in the ranges. And again, I think that's because pocket 7s has such a high frequency of calling. Or it's a big part of the range of calling, is what I meant to say. Because we have 23% of the time here. I think that might be the most common combo that we have for calling. Yeah. So it is, in fact, the most common combo we'll have post-flop. So it really illustrates in the solver that your range is the important thing when determining how aggressive you're going to be on a flop. Right? Like your range and your range advantage is huge. And when you understand what that looks like, you'll be able to understand the frequency and the sizing of the betting that you're going to employ. So what other boards are good for leading out of the small blinds? Oh, I should actually write that down, the whole 7 high thing. 7-7 most common and call. Board textures with a 7 have high frequency leads, especially 7 high boards. All right. What other board textures make sense here? Ace Ace is an interesting board texture. I assume that's because we have a high frequency of suited aces that we're mixing in with our call range, right? Wow, look how often small blind leads here. That's crazy. Yeah, look at this. Best hands go into the small blind's favor. And the equity advantage is big on this board. It's very counterintuitive to lead an ace-ace board, wouldn't you think? Because look at all of the buttons range that has an ace. But I think the thing is that our range is so condensed that the aces make up a larger part of our range than the aces in the buttons range. I think that's why we're seeing an advantage in the best hands category. Even though the sheer combos are in the buttons advantage. Also, we almost have 0 trash hands, which is a testament to what to Young was saying, where the small blind doesn't have any bad garbage. You picked a paired board for small blind versus under the gun. When you look at the reports, it gives you the overall frequency up top. It doesn't matter what the flop says. So this is the overall strategy of button versus small blind. It's just like it needs a board input there to look at it. Sometimes you don't have to pick it for the aggregated reports, but I did, but then click the aggregated reports tab. So if I were to go to the strategy, then it will ask for the board. But if you go to the reports, you don't need it. So I can still go to the strategy here. This is the ACA7 board, right? But if you go to the reports, you can look at the overall strategy still, even if you go to the reports tab. So what was I talking about? 7-7 most common hand to call. Board textures with 7 high frequency leads. Overall, I'm just going to reiterate, small blind has condensed range. So certain flops that's hit small blind are high frequency leads. This is just like very basic. But it's true. So what else do we lead on? So ace boards, 7-6, 7 high, monotone 7 high, 8 high, 6 high, ace high again. It really likes the ace high boards, surprisingly, but the ace high boards without a king or a queen, right? Because a lot of our ace highs are going to be the weaker ace highs. They're not going to be the ace jack, ace queen. So ace highs without a Broadway card, I think, might be some good spots, like ace 7-5. That's a good one. Ace 7-6. There's the 7 again, right? Like ace 8. Ace 8-7. Queen 7-2 is an interesting one. Let's click that. So Queen 7-2 rainbow. Yeah, again, there's a 7 in there. Solver loves the 7 from the small blinds. And I imagine if you change the frequency of calling 7s, it would pick a new card, right? It would then go to like 8s or 6s, and then a 6 or an 8 would be the favorite card. So it's very dependent on your own range as well. Ace 6-2. So ace highs, ace high without Broadway cards, specifically 8 and under. I gotta do this. 8 high and under boards. Okay. So this is our leading range from the small blind, right? It's going to be tricky to learn, but I think if we see some of the the heuristics that we're building right now, like, oh, if we see a 7 on the board, maybe we consider leading, right? Cuz I have a feeling if we just put in something like even okay, now this might be out of line, but king 7-2, maybe we have a leading range here out of the small blind. Yeah. There we go. So like anything with a 7, I have a feeling Jack 7-4 that we can mix in a lead. 9-8-7. This one, yeah, okay. Checks out. What about so Ace King 7? This one okay, we still have a lead. Even on Ace King 7, we can lead here. Cool. What if we take away the 7 and make it a 2? Now, yeah, now it's all gone. And now our whole leading escapades are over, right? Like, what about something like King 3-2? Yeah, a lot less leading. That 7 is like a magic card. Hey, we're leading again. That's kind of fun, actually. That's cool. How much it impacts the range. Cool. All right. Moving on. I don't think there's much else to talk about there. So yeah. Small blind versus button. Small blind has an equity advantage and relatively high leading frequency. 7-7 most common hand to call. Board textures with a 7 have high frequency leads, especially 7 high boards. That's absolutely true. We've just confirmed. Overall, small blind has condensed range, so certain flops that hit small blind are high frequency leads. That's the basic part of the notes here. Ace high without Broadway cards, especially in 8 and under. Especially, I'll just say 7 and under. Specifically, I'll do especially because there are some ace 8 boards and stuff, right? 8 high and under boards. Would this be a double hyphen? 8 high and under. I have no idea how to grammar. All right. So that's the leading part of it. Now, what is the checking part of it, right? Let me clear up some tabs. Make it a little nicer. So we have the call tree. Now we play the check tree. And when we play the check tree, we're going to face a lot of betting. And I think it's a very unique scenario of betting because, again, in position is playing against a range that has the equity advantage. It's a very rare scenario to play against the equity advantage when you're in position, other than flatting the button or the cutoff versus EP, right? And so that kind of gives you a good idea of, oh, that's why the small blind plays a lot of. But then you're not even, yeah. I think that's the only place where you call with a better continuing range than the open. Out of position. In position, obviously on the button when you call, I think it's a little different, but yeah. So that's why it's unique. That's why I'm focusing on this, because I can learn something in other scenarios if this ever happens, like if we're deep stacked or whatever, where it's more common to call out of position with a range advantage or whatever. Moving on. It looks like the frequency of betting is 43.3%. It looks like we're using an even distribution almost of betting 33 or betting 55, betting 50 or 75, and then low frequency of overbets. So the most common bet size we're going to face is the 33. So let's start with the 33. And this is how the small blind is going to respond. We're going to call 62% of the time. That seems high to me. 5.5% of the time, we're going to 50% raise, and about the same for 100% raise. We even have 150% raise, which isn't even available in other sims. So this is a new sizing, which I'll probably just ignore because this looks insanely complicated to have 3 different sizings. But the theory is still there, right? I assume it's on board textures where we're going to have a very large range advantage, and want to push that. And no surprise here, when I sort for the 150, what card is appearing on the left here? A 7, right? 7, 6, 3, King Jack 7, King 7, 6, Queen 9, 7, King 8, 7, all of these combos, and an 8. An 8 also seems to be a key card here, right? Ace, Ace, 8, King Jack 8. So again, just those board textures that really hit our calling range. That are good for check raising large, right? That being said, if we look at even the other raise frequencies, they're going to be similar, right? There's a 7 high, there's a 7 in there, there's an 8, there's a 10, there's a 9. All these combos that we have those mid pocket pairs on are going to be good for check raising using the large size. If we use the 50 size, same idea. The boards are a little bit more connected, more even more, you know, in our wheelhouse with these low connected cards. So like 765, 865, all of that. So it just goes to show that we're finding that in general, as a heuristic, boards that are good to check raise at a high frequency are going to be the ones that interact with our range the most. That's a very basic, fundamental idea, but it's one that a lot of players forget when they're trying to construct the check raise range. So, how do I want to put this into a heuristic / concept? Check raise boards that interact with check raise boards that favor the hero. Check raise boards that favor the hero at higher frequency. That's pretty simple, right? So the boards that you want to check raise are the ones that are going to favor you. And then an example. 764, small blind versus button. Small blind has a lot of 7x. I don't know, something like that, right? We're developing universal heuristics here so that anytime I can take this concept and apply it to under the gun versus small blind. I can apply it to big blind versus button. I can apply it to any of the out of position versus in position scenarios. I can apply it to big blind versus cutoff, right? So those are the scenarios that you end up learning, and the only thing that changes, I'll write this down actually. Only thing that changes in scenarios is the range construction, right? So if we're facing an under the gun range, we're probably going to check raise less than if we were facing a button opening range as the small blind, because under the gun is just going to have a stronger range in general than the button. And we're not going to find as many combos that are going to be doing as well on certain board textures. I would assume theoretically. We can double check this assumption. We can look at under the gun versus small blind call, and then we can look at check and bet 33 and look at how much the small blind check raises. It looks like a total of roughly 14% of the time it check raises, right? Now, what happens when we take this scenario? I hope it's more often. Damn it, I knew it. It was gonna prove me wrong. Okay. So it's less often that it's check raising in this scenario. Why is that? That might be because we have more good hands to call with. Whereas versus under the gun, we might not have as many good hands, so we don't fit our call into the decision as much. That makes a lot of sense to me. Right? We have less of a call frequency, more of a raise frequency, probably because of the distribution of hands across the different boards. That makes sense? Yeah, it does make sense, I think. We'll have more weak hands and more trash hands versus under the gun than versus the buttons, so we end up having... So maybe it's not so much a matter of... It's also... Okay, so I think it might also be... I'll just say range morphology is also important in determining call versus raise versus fold. More trash weak hands want to raise fold more often. More good hands want to call more often. I think that's fairly safe to say. I've seen over a lot of different scenarios. So I think whether or not we're check raising depends not only on our hand advantage and nuts advantage, but also what our range looks like versus the other range. Range morphology versus villain is also important because that changes based on the position they open, right? So under the gun is tighter. We're going to have a lot more weaker hands to continue with. We don't want to call as much. I think that makes sense. I'm just going to write a lot of stuff and edit it later. Wait, hold on. Am I getting that backwards now? Uh-oh. So call here. Let's break this down. we lead less and we also check raise less. Or no, we check raise more. So we lead less and check raise more. We have, then let's see, button. I know there's an answer to this. Sorry if I'm dragging this on. I just really want to figure it out. So we're check raising less from the button. We're calling a lot more. Because we have more equity, because we have more good hands. Okay, that's why. Yeah. Get rid of this here. Okay. I think that makes sense, right? We have more equity with hands versus the button than we do under the gun. So we have more good hands that like to check call. Whereas versus under the gun, we have a more polarized range, which allows us to check raise less frequently, or sorry, more frequently than the button. Because we want to check raise our junk and we also want to check raise our really strong hands against under the gun. I think that's it. What's up, Trivia? How's it going today? Oof. We're getting there, but it takes me a little while to get there. Because this is me literally learning in real time. Like I am learning right now. I don't know all of this stuff. You guys are watching how I figure things out. This is more like overarching theory rather than this specific GTO heuristics theory. I'll make a new little thing here. Put that there. Put that there too. We have more equity, hands versus button. This is good for the small blinds box. This goes here. All right. So I think my brain is well fried for today. Let's go into some. We'll pick up again later for the check raise scenarios. Button. Leading by frequency. That's already in there. Yeah. Oof. Poker's hard. So we could practice here, actually. Let's practice our the thing we just literally studied. That makes sense, right? So let's do Button versus small blind call. On the small blind. All right, right? So since we have a large leading range, let's practice leading out of the small blinds. Makes sense? Yeah? Ace Jack 3, interesting spot because typically this isn't a board texture I would want to lead very often on with the 2 Broadway cards. If the Jack was a 7, we now know that we can lead at a very high frequency. But I think overall we can check most of the time. 6-4-2. This is a board we could lead. 6 high, 7 high boards do fairly well leading. This hand doesn't do very well check calling. So it makes sense that we would lead this at some frequency. Look at that. Very high frequency lead, in fact. King 10-2, I think, is a pure check. 4-3-2 is a board we can lead. This hand is kind of just a disaster no matter what we do. I think this is maybe a hand we always want to check and pray that we get to see a turn. Or we could maybe mix a small frequency of leading. Yep. King 9-6. This might be one we could lead at a mix, but this one's going to check this time. Yeah. The 9-6 is still really good for our range. It makes sense that we could lead. Yeah. 6-5-5 paired boards are probably fine to lead at a mix. But I'm going to mostly check here. Yep. Same thing with 3-2-2. This is a hand I think that just pure checks. Nope, it does lead, in fact. Man, we got to lead a lot of our combos. Queen Jack 9. This is an interesting board because overall I think it should smash button versus small blind here. So I think it's a pure check. That being said, we have a lot of Broadway cards. So maybe this is a better board for us than I'm thinking. Let's try leading. Damn, I was right the first time. 10-9-6. Not quite a 7 here, unfortunately. But we have our most common hand, pocket 7s. So do we want to lead this board texture? I think so. I think we can lead this board texture. That being said, I don't think we want to lead this one because this is a good hand to check call with. Like if I lead, I have to lead and call a raise. I think we want to check more. Yeah, okay, we can lead at some frequency. Ace Queen 9, I think this is a pure check. No, we can in fact lead at a mix. Dang. In fact, do we have a pure check? Is there like a board? So let's filter for check frequency. There are some boards that we pure check. Queen Jack 9 was one of them. Yeah, anytime you have 2 Broadway cards, I think that's a good board for checking. When you have paired boards with a Broadway card on it. And it looks like high Broadway monotones. Okay. 7-6-5. This is a really good board to lead. I'm going to lead here. Jack 4-2. I'm going to... This one, can we lead? Maybe at a frequency. I think this is a good check call or a check raise. We do lead at a mix. Pocket 8s on an 8-8-4 daily quads. Hopefully we didn't waste it today. We could probably lead. I'm going to check this one though. 8-6-5. Again, we can lead. This is a good one to lead, I think. Jack 10-2. So I think this is a high frequency check, but there should be some leading in it. So we're gonna lead. Nope. This is pretty close to a pure check. Let's see if this board texture has any leads. No, this is one of those boards that wants to pure check. So again, I think we're seeing that heuristic of having two Broadway cards be consistent with not wanting to lead here. All right, we'll do this last one and then we'll get into playing some games. King 9-8. Check. Sometimes we can lead. Okay. I made two mistakes. One, leading the Queen Jack 9 board, which we now understand. Like those two Broadway combos with even another connected card are just going to be in the button's favor. And Jack 10-2, same kind of idea, right? They have all the overpairs. They have all the Ace Queen, Ace Jack combos that I don't have. So it makes sense.